All right, testing the audio. Does that sound good? All the way back there? Yes. Excellent. Okay. Thank you for coming to Translating Literature with Eddie Song today. This is a very special program because Eddie Song is a local translator and translates books for the Taiwan market. Eddie is not just an average translator, but an award-winning translator. In 2023 alone, Eddie won in Taiwan as top translator, top prize of Liangshu Literary Translation Award for Interior Chinatown, a 2020 National Book Award for Fiction by Charles Yu, Open Book Best in Nonfiction Translation Prize for 12 Bites by Jeanette Winterson, Open Book Best in Fiction Translation Prize for Acting Class by Nick Dernasso, and he's also an author. And his book, Our Translators Traders, was awarded the Readmoo Reader's Choice Award and the Readmoo Nonfiction of the Year Award. Tonight's program is brought to you by the Friends of the Lake Oswego Public Library. The Friends are a nonprofit group dedicated to providing enhanced support for library projects of community interest. If you'd like to know more about becoming a Friends member, it's only $25 a year to become a supporting member, and we have a table back there where you can sign up. Also, really quickly, this year we have started doing surveys for our programs. So please fill out a survey after the program and tell us how you like it. And that'll help us know what kinds of things we should have more of. And we often send on your kind comments to the people who are presenting if you choose to leave a kind comment. Finally, if you're hearing impaired, we do have an assistive listening system that works both with headphones or T-coil, and you can ask back at the reference desk for that as well. Without too much further ado, I'm going to have Eddie Song come up and take the stage. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, April, for the introduction. And thank you to everybody who comes here to hear me talking. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to add a little bit about my background. I'm also the winner of the Most Insecure Translator Award. However, I'm not afraid to share my literary faux pas with you. But first, let me add a little bit of background. I come from this small island nation of Taiwan, and in college, I majored in foreign languages and literature. And then I went on to get a master's degree in journalism. After journalism school, I served my country for 2 years as a second lieutenant in the Army. And after the military, I became a newspaper reporter for an English language daily in Taiwan. And during all of that, I did a lot of translation and interpretation work here and there. Okay, that's enough about me. Now tell me about yourself. Raise your hand if you speak Mandarin. Yay! Anyone here speaks Cantonese? Taiwanese? Yay! Taiwanese is my first language. Raise your hand if you read Chinese characters. Yay, we got two. Simplified or Chinese? Oh, I mean simplified Chinese or traditional Chinese? Either one? Wow. Wow, good, good. For those of you who are not familiar with the Chinese language, I need to explain. There are two systems of writing. Simplified Chinese, used by mainland Chinese people, and the other one is traditional Chinese, used in Hong Kong and in Taiwan and in and in older Chinatowns. Writing and speaking are two different things in the Chinese language. The speaking is what you call dialect, and there are like more than 100 of them, and they are not mutually intelligible, as different as German and English in some cases. And Mandarin is spoken in China and Taiwan. Some people in Taiwan, like myself, like you also speak Taiwanese, and Cantonese is spoken in parts of Guangdong province or Hong Kong, or the older generation in Chinatowns around the world. Now, don't beat yourself up if you are confused. Just remember, Mandarin and Simplify is used in mainland China. And Mandarin, Taiwanese people speak Mandarin and write in traditional characters. And Hong Kong people speak Cantonese and write traditional. Okay, that's enough clarification. I also need to clarify a few points. English is my third language. I acquired English through public school education in Taiwan. And and this is my very first public speaking in English. So bear with me if it's not quite TED Talk. And another thing is that English pronoun, I always struggle with English pronouns, he, she, it, because all these three share the same pronunciation in Mandarin. And so if you hear me say he when I mean she, or when I say her when I mean his, just bear in mind that's completely unintentional. It's just a language tick I have. Today I have a few lessons to share with you as a literary translator. I pick up these lessons on my literary translation journey. I like to begin with a embarrassing anecdote with the great American novelist Jonathan Franzen. I translated his masterpiece, The Corrections. A few years ago, Mr. Franzen was in Portland to promote his new novel, Freedom. I had the chance to meet him after the event. I brought my translation to meet him, but you know what? The first thing he asked was, how come you never contacted me while you're translating it? And I was really embarrassed because that was the first time and the only time that an author confronted me with that question. For the obvious reason, I never contacted Agatha Christie when I translated her. I never contacted D.H. Lawrence, Mark Twain, and Ernest Hemingway. But I did contact Portland's own Patrick DeWitt. And I contacted George Saunders. I contacted Annie Proulx, Alison Bechdel, Jennifer Egan, Jeffrey Deaver, Nick Hornby, Susan Orlean, and Tess Garrison, and Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I got replies from each and every one of them, but I never contacted Franzen when I translated The Corrections. When I translated Annie Proulx, Wyoming Story, that includes the short story Brokeback Mountain, she responded within an hour when I asked questions. Then she visited Portland, and I was in the audience. Here's what she had to say about me on the stage. Eddie Song asks some of the most intelligent and difficult to answer questions that any translator has. She went on to talk about why questions are important, particularly for dialogue, which can be difficult even for Americans. So there's a lot to explain, and you're always grateful when a translator does ask questions, because quite a few of them do not, and you just don't know. And she ended with a chuckle. And oh yes, I got in touch with Philip Roth when I was translating American Pastoral. He faxed me his reply. He faxed me his reply with his signature through his agent. That was back in 2004 when people are still using fax machines. Guess what? He then hired a Chinese translator to back translate my works into English. Well, now some of you may be thinking, yikes, Eddie, you must have asked some really stupid questions. He must have doubted your competency as a translator. But the fact of the matter is, for Mr. Ross' important works, he would hire translators to check for accuracy. He then shared the evaluation with my editor. So I like to thank Mr. Roth for for his stamp of approval on my translation. Well, yeah, I read the evaluation. They're itemized. This sentence and this sentence, this sentence and this sentence, whether they are accurate or whether they deviate, how much they deviate from the original, and the conclusion of that evaluation is yes, it's a truthful translation. And for that translator's evaluation, some of them I don't agree, because every translator has his own way of translation, and I guess Mr. Roth knows the fact that there are different interpretations. Yeah, and then back to back to the cringe fest with Jonathan Franzen in Portland. In Franzen's presence, I fumbled for something to say for a while, but the truth is, when I was translating it, the corrections have been around for over 10 years, and it was a bestseller and was much talked about. I could find plenty of my friends who are Franzen fans, and I could discuss with them. And also, there are lots of online discussions and interpretations for his statistically improbable phrases. How many of them he has. It's very creative. And that in translators' jargon is very difficult to translate. And another reason for not contacting him was I was trying to make the deadline, so I failed to contact him. I felt awful at the time because it dawned on me right then, right there, that Mr. Franzen himself is a translator. And he translates from German to English. So of all my authors, he knows the importance to query an author. So that was my lesson number one. Always contact the author, if they're still around, that is. And because you got to reassure your readers, the translator and the author are on the same page. Some say that translation is a creative process, and some say that translators have poetic licenses. But I like to think translation is a collaboration between an author and a language professional. Before the Franzen incident, I translated two of Dan Brown's earliest novels. I queried Dan Brown, but through my editor and his agent, but no reply. When the Da Vinci Code hit the jackpot, all of his earlier novels became bestsellers as a result. Back then, I was only 4 years into my translation career, and I was assigned to translate his first novel, Digital Fortress, and the third novel, Deception Point. The reason why I bring up Dan Brown is I like to talk about this tiny little thing called translator insecurities. We have a lot of them. Back then, I was in my 4th year as a literary translator. I was very self-conscious of what Taiwan readers think of my work. Oh, by the way, here's a shout out to my readers in Taiwan. Taiwan 读者大家好. It's already Monday morning over there in Taiwan, 7 o'clock in the morning. Back to Dan Brown. If you read Digital Fortress, you may remember part of the story was set in Sevilla, Spain. You may also remember a chase scene in La Giralda Tower. Bad guy chases good guy in the tower. They run up and down the steps in the tower. Bad guy, dies after falling down several steps. The problem is, in real life, there are no steps in the tower. in my in my little insecure head, Taiwan readers, those who know a little English, may think the author means walking steps, not climbing steps. And I was so afraid that the readers may judge the translator by just one word. Well, think about it. The author is, you know, international best-selling novelist, and the translator is someone who translated just a few books that they'd never even heard of. Which one would they trust? Of course, they're gonna go for the big guy. They're gonna trust the big guy. So they're gonna call. I was afraid they're gonna call it mistranslation. So to preemptively protect my reputation, I added a translator's note on that page, explaining there are no steps but a series of ramps in La Giralda, which upset at least one Taiwanese blogger. And they wrote, "Who is this translator, Eddie Song, anyway? Who does he think he is?" So my lesson number 2 is never point out the author's mistake. Another lesson I learned as a literary translator is I'm not allowed to criticize the book I translate. You may have heard of the book and the movie Devil Wears Prada. I had nothing to do with the translation, but its translator, a Taiwanese woman, who had a lot to say about the protagonist, Andrea. So she wrote an essay, and the essay was published as a translator's endnote to the story. It was, and it's published in the book. In the essay, the translator laments in traditional Chinese that Andrea is a typical 草莓, strawberry, whose ego is easily bruised. Now, I'd like to ask you to think like a translator. How would you translate strawberry in English? I mean, what is the English equivalent for someone whose ego is easily bruised? Anyone? Snowflake, yes, that's right. You think like a translator. Have you ever considered a career in translation? Snowflake. Yeah. Okay, let's back to the devil. The translator goes on to list all the sins Andrea commits as a young employee, which angered quite a few Taiwanese readers who identify with Andrea. So lesson number 3, never badmouth the book you translate. I enjoy reading Devil Wears Prada. Too bad I did not get to translate it. In East Asia and some parts of the world, most translators don't get to approach a publisher with their favorite book of the month. Most translators get assignments from their editors. Now, I often get asked this question, do I love all the books I translate? To answer this, allow me to turn the question around. Do you finish reading all the books you have your hands on? I guess that pretty much answered my question. And of all the novels you read from cover to cover, how many would you rate 5 stars? That's my answer too, as a translator. When your passion for a book cools down, you can choose to skip the rest altogether. You may choose to toss it away, donate it to the library. Well, literary translators have no such luxury. Once we commit to translating a book, there's only one way to go, follow through. It's like a romantic relationship. When I was translating Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I enjoyed it. But truth be told, there are pages and pages of it that I wish I could just skip. However, translators cannot ghost a book, and translators cannot gaslight an author. That's my lesson number 4. There are indeed books I love reading and translating. for example, Susan Orlean, the library book, and The Orchid Thief. I love them. Manhattan Beach by Jennifer Egan. Translating these books is a delight. Jeffrey Archer's Cain and Abel is pretty good too. It was such a page turner. It was like binge watching a series. I work 14 hours a day, and I look forward to the next. It was that enjoyable. But on the other hand, loving a book too much, like loving someone obsessively, can be a terrible thing in translation. I had to constantly rein myself in. I had to keep stopping myself from putting my own spin on the story. If a character simply closes the door, I cannot get carried away and make her angrily kick the door shut. That's impossible. If all the books I translate are delightful, like these, I wouldn't even need a Netflix subscription. But no, more often than not, I get assigned to books I love reading, but grew to hate when translating. Hate here is mostly self-loathing. I'm not good enough for this book, or my Chinese is not up to par with the author's artistry. The hate can also be derived from being too close for comfort. Everything looks perfect from far away. And once you dive into it, you get to the core of it, and you find inconsistencies, you find continuity gaps, you find flaws, or you find unlikable characters, far-fetched, plot twists, that sort of thing, or questionable word choices, like site, S-I-T-E, instead of sight, as in they arrive at the site. He looks through the SIT of his rifle. I kid you not, I translated one of these. Love is complicated. Hate can be complicated too. Let me elaborate on this particular novel, whose author shall remain a mystery. This Sight book is one of the books I hated at first glance, but I fell in love with it when translating it. It's like an arranged marriage. I had accepted the assignment because I had worked with this editor several times before on several books. And I am quite in tune with the books she chooses to publish. So I signed a contract without even cracking open the book or looking at the cover. But when it came time to work, I was instantly mortified. Sight instead of sight. Besides, it's not the kind of book or the kind of author that I am drawn to. Unfortunately, in this case, I went on a blind date, and I accepted his proposal on the spot. I had already signed a contract, and the great, publicity machine was already rolling. So there was no way for me to swipe left. So I opened the book, I took a deep breath, center, and I found my inner peace. I forced myself to read the story. I noted how amateurish the writing was, how I could see the plot twist, a mile away. And it was indeed very painful. But only for the first few days, because after a week or so, what do you know? I grew to like it more and more each day. It's hard to believe. I used to work as a simultaneous interpreter. Simultaneous interpretation is real-time oral translation with minimal delay. As a simultaneous interpreter, you have to anticipate or even think ahead of the speaker. In a sense, tapping into the speaker's brain waves. So when I was translating this sight novel, it was like I was doing the same thing. Strangely enough, I was able to think like its author. I let myself, in a sense, be possessed by his evil presence. And it was smooth sailing after that. Very enjoyable. Literary translators around the world all know this fact. Classics are hard to translate. If a book is easy, it's pretty low on the literary totem pole. The translating process of that book went so well, in fact, I was even tempted to beautify his writing. But I stopped myself because I heard myself yelling no. I could change the typos, yes, but as a translator, my job is to tell the story right, not to make a bad guy good for the weekend. I also like to talk about, during the pandemic, I accepted the offer to start a column for a popular literary website in Taiwan called Okapi. I write about, what else? Translation. But in a personal voice that is different from academic writing, or, I also try to avoid translation theories. In late 2022, the assortment of my articles online got published as a book, and I became an author myself. After 2 decades of translating for others. The title is 译者及叛徒, Are Translators Traitors? I put a big question mark after that. In my column, in this book, I touched on issues such as translator residencies that I've been to in Canada, in Germany, in Latvia. I also wrote about the library program known as public lending right. I know we don't have it in the US. This program is to compensate authors and writers for their loss of income due to library lending. In the column in this book, I also address some very simple English words with pitfalls. For example, like the word corn. We all know what corn is. And early in my career, I stumbled upon a German pop song, I'm Betting Cornfeld. And the word corn, K-O-R-N, I thought it was, like corn on the cob, that kind of corn, maize. But it turns out in German, that word means wheat or grain. It can be, any kind of grain field. And so I looked for the definition of the English, British English. And corn turns out to be grains, not maize. The maize is a different word. And so anything written before Columbus came to America, in Chaucer's time, all the corn means grains. And that's something that Chinese translators make mistake quite often when they translate British English. I also wrote about this word hip. We all know what hip is. But I find that a lot of Chinese translators translate hip into hands on the hip. They translate into this, hands on the butt. And I had no idea. I looked up the English-Chinese dictionary and I found out why. It's because most Chinese-English dictionaries list buttocks as the first translation for hips. And in Chinese, there is a word for hip, but it's medical. And so when you are translating these things, you don't put a medical term in a in a hands on the hip kind of situation. So they're very, very tricky little things in Chinese, in English to translate. And I also wrote about onomatopoeia. I know in English is an alphabetical language. It's easier to spell out sounds, but it's not so simple for Chinese. We use characters. That's already you have already sounds bound to a character. And so I compare onomatopoeia in Chinese and English. I just find that Chinese is lacking so much in onomatopoeia. For example, like, chickadee. You all know what chickadee sounds like. Chickadee, it's very easy. It's in the name. But, if you ask the Chinese translator to translate chickadee, they may translate it into zhi zhi zha zha. And zhi zhi zha zha is just a very common translation, a common description for a bird chirp. It can be a sparrow. It can be any kind of small birds. And it can also be a group of girls chit-chatting. So it's very, Chinese onomatopoeia just doesn't do its job as well as in English. Another thing is that what's the word for dog barking in English? Wolf and arf, yeah, and bark, yeah, and bow wow. There's so many, and small dogs goes ip, yeah. And in Chinese, there's only one, wang wang. And that hardly explains anything. You can't tell how big the dog is. You can't tell whether the dog is angry or friendly. And I chatted with translators from around the world, and they all agree that English is very unique in this dog barking. It's plenty of sound to describe dogs barking. And there's an article that went viral that I wrote in that column. Is that I wrote about common complaints about translation. Not my translation specifically. These complaints are so common. When you can be sure when you go to a website for book reviews, you can find any number of these complaints under the review section. For example, like, I can't quite get into the story. Maybe it's the translation. Most likely, the original story is just as hard to get into. The translator cannot turn a bad book good for the weekend. Sorry. Unless what you want is an over translation. But that's another story. Or, there are complaints like, even the title is mistranslated. Excuse me, we translators don't get to decide the translation. The translation of a title, because the title can be determined by a lot of factors. Can be determined by marketing, or even sometimes the original author has their say in the title. They would say that it has to be in this meaning and this meaning only. So you cannot change it, and it's completely not up to a translator. Or, a common complaint is, it's machine translation. And I hate this kind of remarks. And in one of my articles, I use the opening sentence in The Old Man and the Sea as an example. And I compile a list of 7 translations. There are 5 human translations in it, and 2 of them are by machines. I ask my readers to guess which one is machine translation. Nobody can guess it. Nobody can guess the 2 in that lineup. And I was once accused of using machine translation by a Chinese reader, mainland Chinese reader. Some of my translations are acquired by mainland Chinese publishers too. And this reader cite an example from my translation, freshman. I translated into fresh person, 新鲜人. In Taiwan, that's a very common translation. It's most people know what 新鲜人 is, first year in college. But in mainland China, obviously not. They have something else. And so this reader said, that's obviously machine translated. So, but when I translate, I have Taiwan readers in mind. I don't translate for mainland Chinese readers. it's up to the editors. It's up to the editor's job. Local editors have to change the wording into, local expressions. But obviously, their editors dropped the ball, and I got blamed. On. I have no control over whether my work is published in China or anywhere else, sadly. Or, another common complaint is, the translation is awful. The movie adaptation is much better. How do you say anything to that? I also loved reading and translating Doris Lessing. I translated The Grandmothers. There's a short story collection. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature back in 2007. Another Nobel laureate I had the honor of translating is Abdul Razak Gurna. I hope this is accurate. Abdul Razak Gurna. He accepted the award 3 years ago, and I translated his novel, By the Sea. Mr. Gurna is a Gurnah. That's his last name. Is a British author born and raised in Zanzibar, Tanzania. His story center on colonialism, refugees, immigrant experiences, and most of his stories are set in East Africa. Mr. Gurna's books are hard to come by in the US. Our library here actually carries a few of his titles, and even translations in Spanish too, I checked. But when I was translating By the Sea last year, I had a hard time buying one. I didn't want to count on international shipping from a, UK seller. You know how iffy it was during the pandemic. So eventually I had to go buy the PDF file my editor shared with me. In short, Mr. Gurna is not widely read in the US. After he won the Nobel Prize for literature 3 years ago, he was quoted as saying, "I could do with more readers." In By the Sea, he switches narrators back and forth without warning. And there are flashbacks within flashbacks. There are complicated family relations and a few foreign expressions that could be in Swahili or Arabic or Urdu. Some of them are spelled in his own way. If you translate from English to Chinese or any language into Chinese, your readers expect you to translate all of the foreign expressions. You cannot just skip them. You cannot just, write whatever it is in the original and skip it. For example, in By the Sea, there's a description of a refugee holding facility in the UK. There are refugees who don't speak any English or pretend not to understand English. Let me quote a short sentence from the book. They were sitting school socket until the danger was past. SKUT space SAKIT. I don't even know what language school socket is in. My first instinct was it's Sanskrit. The refugee was sitting on their heels with their legs crossed. That's purely based on my gut feelings. I wasn't sure at all, and I looked up and I asked around. I exhausted all of my resources. So I turned to someone who grew up in Zanzibar and still lives in Zanzibar. His name is Emilian Mbasa. He writes Swahili courses for Duolingo. Duolingo is the language learning app. Mr. Mbasa has never heard of school socket either. So I emailed Mr. Gurna through my editor, but had yet to hear from him. And at that time last year, 2 other Gurna books were being translated by translator Ong Shang-jun in Taiwan and He Ying-yi in Canada. I admire their works. We've never met in person though. So there we were, the three of us translators in 3 countries got together via messaging app line. We helped each other with our questions. And then a month later, I finally heard back from Mr. Gorna via his agent. School socket means quietly. They were sitting quietly. To this day, I still have no idea what that language is in. In By the Sea, the characters make several references to Bartleby the Scrivener. It's a Melville short story. And he makes so many references, but he never really tell the reader what that story is about. So as a translator, I can't just let it pass because the readers are gonna get so confused. It's like I missed one paragraph or something. So I had to add a translator's note. And also, there's a reference of the tomb in the story, in the Bartleby the Scrivener, and also in By the Sea. And the tomb is actually a detention center in Manhattan back in the early 20th century. And I'm so glad I actually read the whole Bartleby the Scrivener story. And so I did not mistranslate that part. So it's also very important for translators to not only read a story, you have to read an extension of the story. So By the Sea is a tough read. I can say it's also a tough role to hold for a language worker. By the way, in Chinese, the verb for working with words is 笔耕. You work the land with your pen to grow your crops. And so it's like, it's like hydroponic. This is, translation is like penponics. In this sense, By the Sea was indeed a tough role to hold. But by the same brushstroke, this is also the challenge most translators welcome, and most translators even live for. So I got on board again without even knowing the title this time. I have agreed to translate his latest novel to be published later this year in the UK, most likely also in the US too. This book, By the Sea, is literally hot off the press. It was published in Taiwan earlier this month. I just received this in the mail from my editor. I'm donating this copy to Lake Oswego Public Library today. So by working with a tough book, a translator has lots to talk about, and lots of love and hate. Easy books, not so much, not memorable, not so much to talk about. That's my final lesson I'm sharing with you today. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. Let me explain the process in which publisher chooses to publish a book and assign a book to a certain translator. It's usually some of them go by bestseller chart. What book is popular, and also another thing is award winners. And then there's also a movie adaptation coming up soon to the theater near you. And these three are the most common kind of books. But a lot of editors have their own idea of a good book. They come across this book that's really good. They will, in their mind, they will think, I happen to have a translator perfect to translate this book. And then they will contact this translator and ask whether they are able to translate this book for them. The first book that I translated was called The Music Lesson. It's by Catherine Weber, the music lesson by Catherine Weber. It was actually assigned to a friend of mine, but she got pregnant and she wanted to raise a family. So she asked around, and I happened to have to just be reading that book with a reading group, with my book club group, and so I agreed to translate that book, and you know, the first one was always the most difficult. I was thinking to myself, there's no way I can make a living out of this. But you know, after 2 or 3 or 4 books, I find my rhythm, and I found my process of translating a book, and that the rest is it. So that's 24 years now.
This is maybe not an interesting question because it varies, but how long does it take you to done so many books? What is the rate at which you work? In other words, you a page a day, 10 pages a day?
It really depends. It's really hard to say. For example, like Jonathan Franzen was very, very difficult. I don't even remember how many pages a day. 3 pages, 4 pages. That was really tough. But for easy books, I also translated a lot of mystery early in my career, like Jeffrey Deaver. Very easy to read, very enjoyable, and I could translate more than 10 pages a day. Yeah, I just go with the flow, and but of course, before that, every day I have to read what I'm going to translate the next day, and I have to work out all the kinks in the story. You know, in a sentence, there are difficult words that I have to look up, or there, like, is it supposed to be funny? But I have to find why it's funny. I have to translate it into translate the humor as well.
How many times do you read a book before you start to translate?
First of all, I read like a reader, like all of you. You know, I read like a reader, and I try to remember my feeling of reading this book, and then I try to replicate it in my translation. And so after I finish reading the book, I crack open page 1, and I start translating from the first sentence. And at first, I could probably translate a page a day, but then I gradually would expand to 2 pages the next day and 3 pages the next day. But after I finished the first day in the afternoon, I will read what I'm going to translate tomorrow, and I will look up all the, you know. I just want to make sure that the next day when I start typing, I am completely focused on translation and nothing else, because you know how distracting the internet is. I have to turn off my Wi-Fi just to live in myself, you know, just have tunnel vision on the story and the author and nothing else.
Maybe my last question is very personal. You said that you began to learn Chinese in school. Did anybody around you,
English.
in school, did anybody around you speak English, or was it only in school?
Well, you know, English education is a school education, and what I learned in Taiwan was actually all classroom English. I had no one, absolutely no one, no native speaker, 100 miles around me. And I actually, the first time I encountered an English speaker was at a bookstore. A guy who looks like a missionary came to me and asked where he can get a copy of Time magazine. And I could actually understand, him, and I was so excited. I was 14, I think, 14 or 15, and that was like the happiest day that year.
Would you talk more about this idea of translators being traders?
Well, you know, traders, it's actually an Italian saying, traduttori, traditori. In that sentence, it's actually translators are traders. But I put a question mark here because I think it's questionable. You can be traders, but you cannot betray all the time, because you betray all the time, you're going to turn into an author. It's an awful thing to say, because a translator is supposed to be hiding behind the author. You know, if you show your true color, the readers find your traces everywhere in the story, then you fail. Did I answer your question?
No, is it that makes people consider a translator a traitor?
Well,
What is it that you're supposed to have done?
well, you know, when you translate a language from one language to another, it's very easy to lose some part of it. There's some part of it just impossible to translate. For example, like if I translate a name in English, like I don't know if I can say that word here. It's a character's name, P galore. Okay, you know that word, that cat, you know, P galore. Yeah, from James Bond, Goldfinger, and you cannot translate that word. You cannot translate the meaning in Chinese, and there's supposed to be humor in that age, and that humor just doesn't convey in this day and time. So that's when you translate that. There's a lot lost in that translation. So in a sense, a translator becomes a traitor because you betray the original meaning. Yeah, but that's forgivable. But you know, if you think yourself is so great in writing and you change the meaning, you even change the ending of the story, then you are a traitor. You are a terrible traitor. See?
Thank you.
You mentioned that you wrote a column and threw in examples and asked people to guess which ones were machine generated, and people couldn't figure it out. Does that mean machine translation is really good?
Well, in that case, that's a point I made in that article is that, yes, some machine translation is so good these days that they can fool you. I'm not even talking about AI yet. Machine translation, back then, that was 2 years ago. A lot of these machine translation, they actually steal their work from the publicly available translation, and they feed that data into their machine translated corpus, and yeah, yeah, yeah. So a lot of them are actually just pilfered translation, and because the first sentence of the Old Man and the Sea are so constantly translated, they could get it pretty accurately. So your question is whether an author can designate a translator to translate their work. I Yeah, I can only speak from my own experience. Have never established such a relationship with an author, but I know a translator. Yeah, a translator. Yeah, yeah, a translator friend of mine actually established that kind of relationship with authors. She translates Richard Powers, and they are good friends. They communicate. They visit each other quite often, and I don't know if these authors actually say, "I want her to translate my work." I don't know, but she translated several of Richard Powers. So. Oh, I think it's a good thing because in a sense, you know what the author thinks, and you have more of his background and where he's coming from. I think it's easier for a translator to work from that point of view. I don't think it's a bad thing. Yeah. Yeah.
versus this.
Yeah.
So that's, is that just one of the pitfalls?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
The dangers or the pitfalls
yeah. It,
built in?
yeah. English and Chinese are so different. There are a lot of these things that are it looks so easy. You look up the dictionary and you translate and it's wrong. So there are lots of these things that we are constantly have to look out for.
Culturally, isn't there a position that's defined?
No, this is very common anywhere. Yeah,
That's common in Taiwan.
yeah, very common. But this not so much. Yeah, I think there are people actually do this, but it's not a thing that you do every day.
So do you feel that you become more cross-cultural by data translation? Like how have you changed or evolved personally
Yeah, by being
as
by
a person?
yeah by being a translator, I would pay more attention to the language itself. I would pay attention to how people use this word in this context. I would I would. For example, like a few years ago, I noticed that I completely misunderstood the word nosebleed, as in it's in a theater. I thought nosebleed was the front row because this is what you do when you have nosebleed. So it's very weird. It's like I live in this country now. I know.
Yeah, in instances where a word has multiple meanings and all of them have some relevance to the story, do you select one meaning and then create a footnote? How do you deal with those situations?
Yes, in a lot of instances, for example, like George Saunders, he uses a lot of puns, and it's puns, and he's meant to be funny. And I asked George Saunders this question, do you mean it like this? And his answer is, if you can't find the equivalent, just create your own funny thing to say about this. And so when you see a movie, when you go see a movie and there's a segment where everybody was laughing and you don't laugh, you don't find it funny. When you're a translator, you have to find the funniness in that part, and you have to translate it. If you cannot translate the funny part, you can also do it shortly before that phrase or shortly after the phrase to make people laugh. So that's what a translator does.
You wrote your book
In traditional Chinese.
as translated, or did you?
No, I'm not going to translate it. I'm thinking that if there's interest in this country, I will rewrite it. I will rewrite it in English. I don't think I can translate this because there are a lot of references in Chinese that you probably won't come across in translation.
So if we enjoyed your lecture, how do we sort of, so you haven't, like, I love your lecture. I would like to, I don't know if you write, you don't write columns, or do you, or you write them in Chinese?
In Chinese, yeah.
I would like to continue seeing something by you about doing, just to let you know.
We can invite him back.
No, I mean, it's just like, like you sort of see a collection of somebody's essays or something like that, and you would, so please work on it.
Yeah, thank you for the encouragement. Maybe there will be an English version.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it's kind of the cross-cultural, like, parts of your job.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming. Everyone, please give a warm hand of applause to Eddie Song. And if it's okay with you, feel free. You can come up and continue to chat for a minute. And on your way out, please fill out a survey and let us know all about the program that we did today so that we can continue to bring you great things. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. This is very exciting. I didn't know that was going to happen today. I appreciate it.
person, so I had to do it all. I said, I'm here on Friday, and I looked at all in Chinese.